that if these behaviors were done regularly, consistently, reasonably well, would lead to success in that role. Do you have a formal sales system? Salespeople are very good at giving you all the right answers about why they're the perfect fit for you to hire them, but then their behaviors don't always match.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Well, welcome to this episode of The Business Coach. I want to talk about something that's very present. So earlier in this week on Monday, I actually had a coaching session with one of our higher end clients. And they're a company that sold millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars of their products over the last 10 years. They manufacture, we're going to call them Acme. And Acme, I'm going to change some of the numbers, it doesn't really matter, but they sell approximately $20 million of the goods and services each year. But they do it mainly through specific channel partners that do the selling, where they provide inventory for them as these supplier partners, as a supplier partner for these companies. And they've never really done this where they've sold directly to the end user themselves or directly to other manufacturers who will then use their products inside of the other pieces they put together. It's called OEM sales. So this is a new one for them, and they want to finally hire a salesperson. They'll call this person a business development person, but truthfully, a business development person is just a subset or type of salesperson. So how in the world do you go about doing that? I want to share with you the exact same coaching that I gave to them, including things about what are the realistic odds of getting it right on the first hire? How can you increase those odds of getting it right on the first hire? Or inversely, what do companies do that are dumb that reduces their odds of success? And then I'm going to come at the same question with the coaching conversation I had several months ago. Another one of our clients that runs a technical services firm, they were trying and were being unsuccessful having other people other than the owner of the company selling their particular professional service, their technical services. And I gave some very specific coaching to the owner of that business about what would he need to do to make that more successful as he started to get other people in addition to him selling, so that over the course of 24, 36 months, he could remove himself from the direct selling of his services and play a higher value role for the business. So how do you hire that first salesperson or salespeople? Let's talk about that. So again, I'll do it with the auspices of Acme, and I'll also do it with this other particular business owner, which we'll call this gentleman Carlos. Again, I've changed the identifiers because I want to be respectful of our clients, but these are actual business coaching conversations I have with clients who have paid us tens of thousands of dollars over the years to help them grow their companies 10%, 20%, 200%, 500% or more. So let's get into it. So the first piece I want to talk about here is, let's imagine you're going to hire your very first salesperson. I'm going to give you some really strange advice. I tell business owners all the time, never hire one salesperson, always hire at least in pairs, hire multiples. Why? Because it's an interesting phenomenon when you are talking with the salesperson in the interview process. If you don't have a lot of experience trying to hire the type of salesperson that you need, your odds of making any one hire successful are actually fairly low. Salespeople are very good at giving you all the right answers about why they're the perfect fit for you to hire them, but then their behaviors don't always match. Matter of fact, rarely match when you put them on the roll, unless you're a company that has experience for how to onboard them successfully and how to put them in a management structure that monitors their behaviors early on to make sure they get off in the first 30, 90, 120 days to the right start. We'll get into this in a moment. But one way to reduce your risk is to hire more than one at a time. So my first advice to Acme was, hey, don't hire one, hire at least two. Now here's the good news. The bad news is it's easy to make a bad hire, and it's easy to make a bad onboard early on if you don't have lots of experiences and the structures and systems to put that new salesperson or salespeople into. So one point of defense is by hiring two or more, you reduce the odds of reliance on any one of them, and you increase the odds of it being successful. At least one of the two will work. Now, the good news in addition to that is salespeople are relatively inexpensive. What? David, what are you saying? Salespeople are my most highly paid people in my company. This is true. Let me qualify that. Let me give you the nuance to it. In terms of their fixed costs, salespeople, their base portion is generally less than many other positions in your company. If you need to hire a new head of marketing, he or she is going to cost more as a fixed cost than bringing on a new talented salesperson. The salesperson's fixed cost tends to be a lower base, whereas most of their compensation is going to probably be variable, commission-based or performance-based compensation, which means early on they're not going to have a lot of results yet, generally, which means their cost is low. And by the way, if they do have lots of early successes, but based on your compensation plan, if the plan is designed properly and you're compensating based on results that have real value for you, number of units sold or percent of volume or new customers coming in that case, you gladly pay the very high dollar amount of commissions to the salespeople because they're the engines that drive all of this stuff. So I said to Acme, let's hire two, not one. And let's be very clear on who it is that you need to hire. As we talked this through, one of the salespeople they wanted to bring on was someone to help them to find direct sales opportunities selling to end users of their particular gizmo that they make. We'll call it a widget. So that person would be more of what you would call a hunter salesperson, but they're making a technical sale. So they need a certain technical chops and they need to be more of a hunter. This person has to be able to prospect. Why? Because in their structure, they don't have a marketing system set up to generate lots of leads. So this person has to be able to prospect so that he or she can find their own sales opportunities. That's important. One of the first hurdles to make a successful sales hire is to know what type of salesperson you need. Do you need a hunter? Do you need a farmer? Someone's going to work as an account manager, taking existing client relationships and growing those client relationships. Do you need a closer? Like your company generates all the leads, hands over these very well qualified leads for this person to go into the home or go into the office or over the phone or over Zoom to close the business itself. Or do you need more of a technical type of salesperson that can combine with an engineering department to make a very technical sale? Or the list goes on. So one type of salesperson, we'll call this person a hunter, is what they needed. They needed someone who could really do prospecting. If I hire someone who I expect to be doing just closing, I'll tell you that rarely do people who specialize in that closing function, they're not going to have the thick skin and the muscles, the chops, to do lots of prospecting activities, lots of phone calls, lots of prospecting emails, lots of early conversations with that part. By the same token, those people who are really good on the prospecting side tend to be, at best, adequate on the closing side. They're not a specialist in getting decisions today. So we can minimize our failure rate by hiring the right type of salesperson to fit our need. So they wanted to have one that was going to be doing the direct selling to the end users. And the second salesperson they wanted would be to help them develop new relationships with manufacturers that would take their widgets and incorporate them into the things that they sold to other people. This is many times called OEM, where you're having equipment being put into someone else's products. We've got many clients who manufacture or do things like that. The margins tend to be a bit lower because you're not selling to the end consumer, but one relationship can sell lots of things. That tends to be more of a business development type of salesperson, a person who can develop not just the going out and making 100 prospecting phone calls in the course of a week, but can be strategic in how they identify who they go after, how they think about who the influencers are and how they get in the door and how they grow that opportunity to do business with that other party. It tends to be someone who's more experienced with a more complicated, longer sales cycle. So these are the two types of salespeople that they needed. The next piece of advice, I want to give you the exact same coaching I gave to them. So I talked about always hiring in multiples. I talked about making sure that you're hiring the right type of salesperson. The third bit of coaching I gave to them is to not have false expectations. Realistically, since they had never hired salespeople before, the chances of them doing it successfully, I would put it at 30-40% at best of having any one of those hires work well. 1 out of 3 would probably be pretty normal or typical. If they got really good, they had an existing sales system, they had experiences hiring this type of salesperson for this type of sale, their odds for success might shoot up to 60 or 70% chances of it being successful. Rarely are you ever going to have 80 or 90%, and you're never going to have 100% odds of success with a hire. The more you regularly hire for a type of role, the more refined you are about exactly who you need and have the structure and the systems to onboard and to effectively manage and launch that new salesperson, the greater your odds of success are. But here they are, probably they're at 30%, 40%. Now, the good news is they've got 2 salespeople. So even if they're at the low end of 30% success rate, 30% success rate, their chances of one of those 2 working out just increased to 60%, assuming that they're independent of one or the other. Now, the next piece of advice I gave is they need to be very clean on, especially for the business development type of salesperson with this long sales cycle, they need to be clean on what are the behaviors that they would need to see that if these behaviors were done regularly, consistently, reasonably well, would lead to success in that role. When you think about hiring a salesperson, like let's take that business development person, it might be 6 to 12 months before you see the real result of that early labor that they do. It's long sales cycles. These are relationships that have to be started from scratch. In this industry, it's probably not atypical, 6 months at least. What you don't want to do is be paying out X thousands of dollars a month for someone who's not doing the behaviors that lead to the other. So if I reframe what I'm doing so that I think about the first 120 days of that new salesperson coming on board, think of it as an extended working interview. What would I want to see in the first 30 days? What would I want to see in the first 90 days? What would I want to see in the first 120 days? And if I can be really clear that what are the behaviors that if they were to do, the phone calls they would make, the research that they would do, the leads that they would populate into a spreadsheet, the relationships that they would have started, the meetings that they would have scheduled and held, the pipeline that they would have developed by the end of that 120-day period. If I can be really clear on that, then what I can do is I can communicate to that new person coming on board what expectations are and really set them up to succeed. And then I can manage them to be accountable for those behaviors in the first 30 days, in the first 60 days, in the first 90 days, in the first 120 days. And let's say it's 3 weeks in and I'm not seeing the behaviors I need to make. The average company that hasn't done this before, what they will do, I see it all the time. These are the people that ultimately become clients of ours. I see it all the time. Before they came to us, the way they manage that is they let the salesperson talk them into, oh, it's in process. And they check in with the salesperson. Hey, how's it going, Joe? Hey, how's it going, Sheila? They don't check on the salesperson. What's the difference? Checking in with the salesperson, I take their word for it. I let them report back orally what's going on. And of course, being the great salesperson that they are, they give me all kinds of indicators about how exciting it is. Right around the bend, they're going to have big stuff happening. It's all in the works, David. It's all in the works. But when I check on, and I look at their dial volume, and I look at how many strategic leads have they populated into the spreadsheet or CRM, and what I see is it's actually not around the bend, that they are woefully behind. And if I can find that out in the first 2, 3, 4 weeks, now I can go back to that salesperson and I can say to that salesperson, hey, Joe, you know what? Here's what I've observed here. I've looked in here and taken a look at the dialer and your numbers. You're showing that in the last week alone that you've only made 15 outbound dials and you've only generated 2 new possible target companies to go after into the CRM. Now, you and I talked at the very beginning that the expectation would be, right, and I can have this direct adult conversation with my salesperson. And the earlier I do that, the more I put them on notice, and I actually increase the odds. Here's the irony. By managing closer, I increase the odds of that salesperson doing his or her best because they know that their actions, their activities are going to be transparent and visible, which increases the odds of them doing what they need to be doing. So with salespeople, we talk about shrinking the units of accountability. I don't want to wait for a month to hear them orally report what they've done. I want to see what they've done today. I want to look at the spreadsheet or later on at the CRM that I can get the report from. How did they do? I want to look at the day and I want to look at the week's behaviors. I don't want to wait to the month, and heaven forbid wait to the quarter. Too big of a unit of accountability, too easy for them to go off course. I want to shrink the units of accountability. It's a huge concept, and it makes such a difference. I have that early adult conversation, and now I'm much more likely to get the best from that salesperson. If they don't honor what we've agreed to, the next conversation is either we're done or, I've been clear. We had the earlier conversation 2 weeks ago. I still have, this is what I'm seeing. That's not at all what we've agreed to. Let me ask you, are you committed to doing these steps that we've talked about? Is that doable and realistic from your part? It is? Great. I'm going to check in with you at the end of each day. At the end of each day, here's what I'm expecting to see. Over the course of the next 30 days, if I see that daily behavior being the right way, generating a reasonable level of result, then we'll shift from me checking in every day to checking in a couple times a week and then having more of a deeper review each week, right? So I can shrink the units of accountability and then I can give them a little bit more leeway. But what it does is it lets me know that of those 2 salespeople I hired or 3 salespeople I hired, if one of them, which chances are they probably are, is not doing the behaviors, I find out within the first 2, 3, 4 weeks. I get to make my decision fast and early. If they can't get off to a good start and they're not going to change the behaviors after 1, possibly 2 adult conversations, you know what? They need to develop their career with another organization. You don't have time for it. And your cost for that, think about it. Your cost for that would have been 1, possibly 2 months worth of base pay, but you probably have no variable cost with that. So you know what? You got off easy. And the other person hopefully did work out. Let's say they both work out. That's wonderful news. Most of how you pay a salesperson is going to be a variable cost based on the result that they're generating. And if they're generating a great result, you're not going to begrudge that. You're going to happily pay that. You're going to smile at that. So the next piece that's important, this is the coaching I gave to Acme. And I said to this client, I said, hey, right now you have a sense of what some of the behaviors would need to be. And I was doing a guest coaching session. So I said to them, I said, talk with your Maui coach. And your Maui coach can help you to develop what are the specific behaviors you would need to see from this person. Now, you don't know how many of these things they can do. You don't know how many dials they can realistically make or how many leads can they realistically add to the spreadsheet later on into the CRM. You don't know how many appointments they're going to be able to set or meetings they're going to be held in a period of time yet. But when you create the categories of those things and track for your first generation of salespeople, it gives you a baseline that later on, now the next grouping of salespeople, you have some realistic data that says they should at least be able to do X. And that's an important one. Now let's shift gears for a moment. I want to go back to Carlos, my other client, and at the beginning of summer, several months ago, I had coached him as a guest. He had a really interesting challenge. I just jumped in. I like to do that sometimes with clients. Most of the coaching is handled by our staff, but every once in a while I get to put my fingers back in there as a guest coach. And as I did this guest coaching session with Carlos, his comment was, David, I tried finding some other people to sell, but they just can't do what I do. And this is a really common refrain that I hear. I tried to get someone else to do what I do, in this case selling, they just can't do it. And so the most common response is to take back and grip onto the ownership of that task or ongoing responsibility. What most business owners never do is look at how they delegated that functional responsibility to somebody else. They just say, it just doesn't work. I have to be the one doing this. And that's a valid choice. And I share this. I said, Carlos, you can hang on to that and you have an extraordinarily high closing rate. but you will be stuck doing this forever. And what's more, the more you're the one selling, the more your customer, in your case a client, is going to want to look to you for the delivery of those technical services. Because if you're the one they bonded with in the sales process, it's very common that they're going to want you to be the person delivering the technical work. It happens all the time with owner-reliant companies. And this traps the owner in this treadmill where everything revolves around them, that they're the rainmaker and the rain producer. They're the one who sells the job, produces the job. They're the one that the client wants to see. One of the important ways to break that cycle out is to have somebody other than the owner playing the sales function. Because now it becomes easier for you and your business to get your client or customer to look to your business to fulfill on the product or service offering, not to you, the owner, personally. It's a big move. So I said, Carlos, how did you go about it? And he shared how he went about it. He said, I had them watch me for a while. They shadowed me. I kind of talked them through. I gave them some coaching. I said, okay, here's what I want you to consider. Number one, do you have a formal sales system? In other words, could you map out from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4 that these are the steps and stages for a sale? You don't have that? It's one thing you need for your formal sales process. You need a visual map that says, here's the step 1 to step 2 to step 3, because those visual map of box 1 leads to step, box 2 leads to step, box 3, eventually leads to box 4, which is the sale, which leads to box 5, which is the effective handoff to my production team that does the service offering. Again, that's just an example. If I can visually map that out, now it lets a new salesperson conceptually know that, okay, I've got people in stage 1. My goal is to get them not to stage 4. My goal is to next get them to stage 2. And then I can get them to box number 3 so that I can now close to get them to box number 4 so that I can now hand them off to our delivery team who's going to actually do the work. So I need to visually map it out. Next, I asked them, do you have a formal sales scripting for how you go about? Is there a structure for how you work with a prospective client to qualify them, to then go through the sales conversation in such a way that it leads to a sale? And he says, well, yeah, we do. And I said, great. Could you email that to me? Oh, we don't have it written down. It's just I go through it with them. Okay. So when I talk about a formal sales structure and process, generally that means an actual script. A script that has a structure behind it. It might not be every word for word. It might have area that it has examples of what you might say. But generally, I like it to be a script that then can be practiced and owned by the other person. Sometimes it's going to have more flexibility than just that, but it needs to be something in writing. So the moment I have a process, a script, and a minimum level of what I'll call sales collateral, I now have a better chance of training someone else on how to sell. Now, sales collateral would include things like maybe it's a summary of your product offering or your service offering. Here's what you get, here's how it benefits you, and here's the cost. Maybe it's sales paperwork, right? They're going to need a contract to sign or somehow to sign up for your service or to buy your product. Oftentimes it might include a couple of white papers or case studies. But at the minimum, there is going to be some minimal level of sales tools that are going to be needed. Those sales tools are what we call sales collateral. They might be PDFs. They might be physical things that get sent to somebody. They might be web pages that are designed and set up or some other component. All right. From there, now we want the next layer of how is it that I have a process to train a new salesperson in that sales process, in that sales script, and to use those sales tools to get a sale. Now, once I do that, now a new salesperson comes in and they have not just me telling them, here's how I do it, kind of improvising, but I give them a structure that they can follow. They follow that structure, their odds of success go exponentially increased. And that's how we start to scale a sales force. And as I'm teaching my new salespeople about this, let's say I brought on 2 salespeople, I can see where do they struggle and where are they successful. And then over time, I can enhance that core sales system. I might start doing some of the training on the scripting where I record myself doing it so that I can have them watch and reinforce the learning. I might have that we commonly get 2 objections regularly, and I might have a special training process to handle those 2 objections and to harness those objections to further the sale. I might do some drills with my salespeople to not just role play them, but to really let them practice it so they can get it not just from their head, but into their hands so they can use it in the field. I might create a process whereby I audit certain sales phone calls or certain sales visits where I ride along with them, and using a predetermined feedback form, I can give them direct feedback based on what they did so that their actual field experience helps them become better. Those are all ways to enhance it, but it starts with, do I have a sales process visually laid out? Do I have sales scripting in writing of some sort? And do I have at least a base level of sales collateral? From those things, I can now start to create a training system with my staff who are selling that way. And this is how Carlos can go from just him selling to him getting 1 or 2 other people who can start to do the selling. And eventually what happens is, as they become successful, he can start doing less of the selling himself. He probably is very strategic. He takes the highest dollar value sales that really he should be involved with. He uses him selling as an opportunity to continue to train his salespeople. And then over time, he pulls a little bit more and a little bit more incrementally out of selling. And he backfills him with these salespeople. And over time, he then finds somebody else to even manage. These eventually will be 2, 3, 5, 7, 12 salespeople. And when he's able to do that, what he's done is he's freed himself up in that role to be able to do other much higher value things for the company. So let's summarize what we did here. In this episode, we talked through how do you successfully make those first sales hires. I gave you the example for Acme. We talked about how do we identify what type of salesperson do we need. How do we get very clear on what the behaviors are that we would need to see from the salesperson so that I can shrink the units of accountability so that I'm looking at the first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, etc. And I think about the first 60 to 90 days as a working interview. And if I'm not seeing the behaviors I need to see, I have a quick, direct adult conversation. If I still don't see, I either make a change or I have a second, stronger adult conversation. But I'm not going to have more than 2 of those before we say, hey, we don't have a fit. We talked about in hiring in multiples, which increases your odds for being successful with that part. We talked in there about how can I, as a owner who's very good at selling my product or selling my service, start to formalize and capture into a sales system for my sales people eventually to be able to do. Talked about your sales process visually laid out so I know the steps and stages in that sale. We talked about having some formal scripting in a structured way, in writing so I can train and cross-train somebody else. We talked in there about having a minimal level at least of sales collateral and then working to train people and refining that as you go. I hope that you use the ideas that I shared today to help you scale your sales team and to be more successful. Let's face it, the engine for your business's growth starts with sales. And here you've got a dozen different coaching suggestions that came from actual clients that we coach that I hope that you can put to profit in your business. I wish you every success.